What has undermined and sabotaged sovereignty and personal freedom and liberty more than any other factor in modern history? It is one of the major problems that infringes on the freedoms and liberties as delineated in the Constitution and Bill of Rights of the United States. This also affects most of the Western world. The prosecution of victimless, quote, crimes, unquote. A child being prosecuted for selling lemonade without a license. Someone who lives out in the boondocks being prosecuted for not paying for nor applying for a building permit. A farmer selling raw milk or produce from his garden. Someone using a substance that is condemned under the farce of the war on drugs, or using alcohol at a time prohibited, or a citizen being prosecuted for planting a garden or a rose bush in a location that some bureaucrat deems unaesthetic. Hello, I'm Randy, and I'll be your host today. About 15 years ago, I personally was subpoenaed into court because my rose bushes were getting scraggly. This was during a time when my wife was dying of cancer, and it was true that I had neglected to a certain extent less important matters like pruning. But it was claimed that the bushes violated motor vehicle code, and I personally could have ended up in jail for 6 months. My personal freedom was being threatened for violation where there was no victim. This fact has bothered me for many years. But finally, the thing that got me to really start thinking about how our freedom and liberty had been eroded was when I discovered my son was incarcerated for a DUI, not drinking while driving, drinking several hours before driving. This evil impelled me to develop this documentary. A DUI carried the penalty of a felony. My son had never injured anyone, nor was he robbing or raping anyone, and just because of a drinking problem, he could now lose his rights to own a firearm or vote and be lumped into those who rape, rob banks, or murder, being convicted of a felony. His personal freedom was being threatened because of an alleged potential possibility of a crime. He had drunk alcohol several hours before driving. I am no advocate for using alcohol or any other drug for that matter. In my own personal opinion, it's pretty stupid to use mind-altering drugs when society needs well-grounded citizens. But the attack on personal liberty and freedom using this excuse is part of the reason of how we have come this far in losing personal freedom and liberty. Society has taken a detour down a deep, deep sewer. The stench is horrible, and it's time to get us out. I first began my awakening of this and other facts when I was a small lad. My father took me to this weird group of guys who talked about the New World Order, the Trilateral Commission, etc., the John Birch Society meetings. Then, during my stay in Brazil, a friend of mine gave me a video called Verdade Oculta, Hidden Truth, by Brother Rubens, and I heard Rubens translating original content from English. I used Startpage to search the source on the internet, and I discovered Alex Jones' Infowars.com. The John Birch Society started me on the path, and Infowars helped me define what I had felt intuitively almost since infancy. Something was really wrong with society, and society was being portrayed for the young and innocent like a matrix, a fraud or sham, stating that it was one thing, but it was really something totally the opposite in its essence. The history cited in the history books has in reality been a story, a tall tale, a fable. Things like how society was shamed into sending their sons to fight in multiple wars, even world wars, that only served to benefit the global elite, the aristocracy, and the whole, claiming that it was honorable to kill the sons of a different culture or race. when none of the aristocracy were sent to die as cannon fodder. I discovered that it is irrelevant if you claim allegiance to the Democrats or the Republicans. The right-left Democrat-Republican paradigm was just another illusion, a fraud perpetrated on society to distract the citizenry from the all-important issue. The real issue is who is promoting, protecting, and preserving personal freedom and liberty. Any politician or any law must be measured by this barometer. If they promote, protect, and preserve personal freedom and liberty, then we keep them. If not, then we throw them both out, the laws and the politicians. Mr. Obama has had a difficult time measuring up to this, from his involvement with the Fast and Furious in order to justify unconstitutional laws confiscating firearms, or the fake crocodile tears shed over Sandy Hook.
Ages of 5 and 10 years old. Weddings, kids of their own. Teachers, men and women who devoted their lives to helping our children. They know that their children's innocence has been torn away. And they need all of us right now, be at our best as Americans.
Constant attack on personal liberty, with his instigation and involvement with the NDAA, National Defense Authorization Act, which authorizes the detention, translate, arrest, of anyone the government claims is involved in so-called terrorism. And while Obama cynically claimed he had misgivings for the language his administration demanded to be added, he quietly signed the bill on New Year's Eve to avoid more controversy. Furthermore, please note his fraudulent claim of concern for children in the U.S. in order to justify taking guns away from the law-abiding citizens, the very same guns used to protect the children he deemed so important. Recognize that Sandy Hook could have been prevented or mitigated if just one of the teachers had the smallest firearm and training on how to use it. 2 bullets, 1 per assailant, was all it would have taken to stop the massacre. Also, if schools were not advertised to the world as gun-free, no pharmaceutical drug-induced psychotic would choose to attack there. And furthermore, removing the guns, but not the psychotic-induced drugs, would just force machetes or other lethal weapon to be used. Then we would be discussing forced buyback of machetes, pitchforks, chainsaws, knives, forks, and spoons. The problem is the psychosis from Big Pharma's drugs being dumped on society. With millions of prescriptions, a few weak minds will crack. Even the medicine insert alerts that usage will potentially cause the very thing it's supposed to prevent. Why isn't the war on terror being used to prevent Big Pharma from warping the U.S. collective mind to create these psychopaths? Additionally, Obama certainly does not consider the same guns used to protect him or his children as potentially harmful to society. Why does he think he should have the right when the rest of society should be left unprotected? Is he a real elitist and considers himself special? He has been a total failure as a promoter of personal freedom and sovereignty of the U.S. Not just Mr. Obama, but all those involved in the House and Senate who have been busily destroying personal liberty by not impeaching Mr. Obama, nor enacting legislation to impede Mr. Obama's attack on freedom. Moreover, Mr. Obama is not eligible to be President of the U.S. because of a minor detail. It is prohibited by the Constitution of the U.S. Mr. Obama was born in Kenya. But who in the legislature know this and have done nothing? However, before you begin to think along the fake demo Republican paradigm, recognize Mr. Bush and all the Congress and Senate was just so much a failure of promoting, protecting, and preserving personal freedom and liberty with the implementation of the fake Patriot Act, the Homeland Security fiasco, the TSA, to state just a few. And we won't even discuss Bush's and Cheney's involvement in 9/11 fame at this time. Even though this documentary does not have as its focus to discuss in detail the attack on the Second Amendment, the freedom grabbers stand poised with poisoned pen to turn millions of law-abiding citizens into criminals overnight with the greatest attack on personal liberty and freedom ever, with the most sweeping implementation of victimless crime laws the U.S. has ever seen. And with this step, it will be the tipping point, the fuse that throws the U.S. into civil war. How did we get to this point? In the original meaning of the Constitution and Bill of Rights, the Bill of Rights lists as one of the inalienable rights as the right to petition the government for redress of grievances, stipulating that there must be a grievance suffered by a victim. Therefore, how could a redress for a grievance be petitioned if there were no victim? The original role of the state during the colonial and revolutionary periods was to assist the victims of crime to seek restitution from the criminals. Until then, the U.S. criminal so-called justice system was victim-oriented. Therefore, without a victim, it was impossible to have a crime. As the role of government during the 19th and early 20th centuries expanded beyond the scope designed by the Founding Fathers, however, the focus shifted so that potential acts could be prosecuted as crime, quote unquote, since these acts were seen primarily as a social harm and moral wrong. The criminal justice system became a tool for creating crime where there was no victim, a form of punishment for infractors, rather than an avenue for redress of personal harm. And the role of a victim in criminal proceedings was entirely eliminated. The capstone of the brutal affront was in 1973 U.S. Supreme Court decision in Linda R.S. versus Richard D. 410 U.S. 614. This ruling made it clear that the victim served just as a witness or piece of evidence. Now, whether you agree or not on the rights enumerated in the Constitution Bill of Rights, such as the right to bear arms, on drug usage, the abuses of the so-called war on drugs is not a war on drugs, but a war on the liberty and freedom of humankind. This has further been amplified with the fake war on terrorism. Regardless if you understand the true involvement of the federal government's false flag attack of 9/11, the fact remains, the event was used by the majority of the politicians as the broadest attack of personal freedom theretofore. Now, one of the worst illusions, one of the greatest frauds perpetrated on the U.S. society, worse than the fake Democrat-Republican paradigm, is the fact that politicians do not represent you, the common citizen. They represent those who paid for their being elected. So, unless you contribute an obscene amount of money to a politician's election campaign, then the real truth is that you have no voice in the political process, and your vote is meaningless. And with the pervasive election fraud, even that vote is a farce. The need to vote and calling the politicians your representatives is just one other cruel deception flaunted in the face of the U.S. citizenry. Politicians, especially those in Washington, D.C., do not represent our views. Would you get caught with another person performing a sexual act? This band of politicians, for the most part, is a base, amoral group. However, even though the politicians do not represent us, the one thing they fear worse than death itself is unemployment. If enough of the nation forces the issue, the politicians will capitulate. So the ultimate power resides with the people. All it takes is enough people to demand their rights to personal liberty, freedom, and sovereignty, and the politicians will have to do the people's wishes, in spite of the global elite aristocracy and their nefarious plans for humankind and their new world order. The one sure way to impede the new world order is to demand our personal liberties and freedoms. Now is the time to get involved to protect your rights. Contact the politicians and tell them that this will be their last term in office if they do not produce liberty-enhancing laws forthwith. Explain that the Second Amendment is your right, and if they try to alienate millions of people with draconian laws, then they will be the next in the unemployment line. Get your neighbors involved. The U in the U.S. stands for United, and now is the time. Use the resources of the internet to our advantage while we still have access. Twitter, Facebook, and email. This video contains copyrighted material, the use of which has not always been specifically authorized by the copyright owner. We are making such material in an urgent effort to promote peace, freedom, liberty, and advance understanding of the criminal justice system, human rights, whether they be political, democratic, economic, scientific, and also promote social issues congruent to increase freedom, sovereignty, and personal liberty. We therefore believe that this constitutes fair use of, as provided in Section 107 of the U.S. copyright law.